The loan denial slip trembled in her fingers as the bank manager she once shared a bed with, the man whose name still appeared beside hers on a joint account he'd secretly drained for another woman's rent, dismissed her application with the same contempt he'd shown when calling her too fat, too poor, too unworthy to remain his wife. What Brandon Mitchell didn't know as he smirked across that mahogany desk, his mistress Victoria, perched on the corner like she owned the place, was that the signature required to approve every major decision in this gleaming multi-billion-dollar financial empire belonged to the penniless woman before him, the same woman he'd forced into a snowstorm with 3 newborn infants just 6 months ago. The wedding invitation burning in her purse promised a celebration in 2 weeks, but the documents hidden in her attorney's office promised something far more devastating, a reckoning that would strip away everything Brandon thought he'd gained by abandoning his family. Could the ex-wife he'd discarded like garbage truly control the very institution where he'd built his pride? Would the mistress who'd spat in her face on that frozen doorstep still be laughing when the truth emerged? And what kind of revenge could possibly balance the scales of a man who chose his ego over his own children? The fluorescent lights of Apex Heritage Bank's main branch hummed with the kind of sterile efficiency that made desperation feel even more suffocating. Rebecca Torres stood in line, her worn coat buttoned against the December chill that somehow penetrated even indoor spaces when you couldn't afford to feel warm anywhere. The babies were with her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, sweet, patient Mrs. Chen, who never asked why 3 6-month-old infants sometimes came to her door at odd hours, who never questioned the hollows under Rebecca's eyes, or the way her hands shook when she handed over the diaper bag. 6 months. 6 months since Brandon had looked at her post-pregnancy body with disgust so pure it had cut deeper than any blade. 6 months since he'd called her a fat, worthless burden while their triplets, his children, cried in their bassinets. 6 months since he'd thrown her belongings into garbage bags and shoved her into a February snowstorm with 3 infants wrapped in whatever blankets she could grab. The line moved forward. Rebecca clutched her loan application until the papers crumpled at the edges. $5,000. That's all she needed to keep the lights on in her studio apartment, to buy formula that seemed to cost more each week, to fix the car that had died last Tuesday, stranding her at the grocery store with 3 screaming babies and judgmental stares that suggested she was exactly the kind of person who made poor life choices. Next, the voice froze her blood. Rebecca looked up to find Brandon Mitchell, her ex-husband of exactly 4 months, 17 days, and roughly 6 hours, sitting behind the loan officer's desk like a king on a throne. He wore a suit she didn't recognize, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His hair was styled differently, shorter on the sides, and he'd grown the beard he always talked about, the one she'd encouraged him to try before he decided her opinions were worthless. Well, well. Brandon's smile could have frozen lava. Rebecca, what a surprise. She forced her feet to move, each step across that polished marble floor a small act of war against every instinct screaming at her to run. She sat in the chair across from him, her thrift store purse clutched in her lap like a shield. "I need a loan," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. Brandon leaned back in his leather chair, the kind that probably had lumbar support and massage settings, and made a show of taking her application. His eyes, the same green eyes she'd once thought she'd see across the breakfast table for 50 years, scanned the papers with theatrical slowness. $5,000. He said it like she'd asked for the moon. "And what exactly makes you think you're a good credit risk, Rebecca?" The use of her first name, formal and distant, hurt more than she'd expected. 6 months ago he'd whispered "Becca baby" while promising forever. Now she was Rebecca, pronounced with the same distaste someone might use for roach or refuse. "I have a business plan," she started, but Brandon was already shaking his head. "A business plan?" He laughed. Actually laughed. "Let me guess. Some little craft business, going to sell homemade jewelry on the internet." Heat flooded her cheeks. Her hands tightened on her purse. "I'm starting a consulting firm. Financial consulting. I have clients already. I just need—" "You?" Brandon interrupted, his voice rising loud enough that other customers turned to stare. "Financial consulting? Rebecca, you couldn't even manage our household budget when we were married. You spent money on stupid things, useless things, and now you want to give other people financial advice." Every word was a carefully placed knife. Rebecca felt them all, felt the way they sank in deep, found the soft places where her confidence had once lived. Because there was a terrible truth in his cruelty. She had managed their household budget during their marriage. She'd managed it perfectly, actually, had invested their money wisely, had made decisions that quintupled their net worth over 7 years. Brandon had just never known the full extent of what she'd done. He'd never known a lot of things. "Your credit score is—" Brandon made a disgusted sound. "Well, it's exactly what I'd expect. And your employment history shows you haven't worked in over a year." "I was pregnant," Rebecca said quietly, "with triplets. High-risk pregnancy. Doctor-ordered bed rest." "Convenient excuse." Brandon shuffled her papers with the dismissive efficiency of someone who'd already made up his mind. "And I see here your references include, oh, this is Rich, your former mother-in-law." Patricia Mitchell had been a godsend these past months, one of the few people who'd looked at what her son did and called it what it was: unforgivable. But Brandon didn't need to know about the secret lunches, the money Patricia slipped into Rebecca's purse when she thought no one was looking, the way she'd held Rebecca while she sobbed and promised that her grandbabies would never want for anything. "She's a respected businesswoman," Rebecca said. "She's senile," Brandon shot back, "and biased. This application is a joke, Rebecca. You're a joke. You come in here looking like—" His eyes raked over her worn coat, her scuffed shoes, the purse with the broken zipper she'd been meaning to fix for weeks. "Looking like you can't even take care of yourself. And you expect a prestigious institution like Apex Heritage Bank to trust you with $5,000? The intercom on his desk crackled. "Brandon, sweetheart, I'm here." Rebecca's stomach dropped as Brandon's whole face transformed, softening into something that looked like joy, like love, like every expression he used to wear when looking at her. "Send her in," he said, his voice warm honey, and Rebecca wanted to vomit. Victoria Chen, no relation to the kind neighbor, thank God, entered in a cloud of expensive perfume and designer clothes. She was everything Rebecca wasn't. Tall where Rebecca was average, sleek where Rebecca still carried pregnancy weight, polished where Rebecca felt permanently rumpled by the chaos of single motherhood. Her black dress probably cost more than Rebecca's car had been worth before it died. "Oh." Victoria's red lips curved into a smile that made Rebecca's skin crawl. "It's you." The memory hit like a physical blow. Standing in the doorway of what used to be her home, 3 newborn babies somehow strapped to her body in various carriers and slings, while Victoria stood in Rebecca's living room wearing Rebecca's bathrobe and holding a glass of Rebecca's wine. "Brandon said you might try to come crawling back," Victoria had said that night, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Let me be clear, this is my home now. Those squealing brats are your problem. And if you think you can guilt Brandon with tears or nostalgia, you're even more pathetic than he said." Then she'd spat, actually gathered saliva and spat right in Rebecca's face, while Brandon watched from the couch, not defending, not protesting, just watching. Now Victoria draped herself across the corner of Brandon's desk, her hand possessively on his shoulder. "Baby, are you almost done? We need to pick up my dress for the wedding." The wedding. 2 weeks away. Rebecca had received her invitation last month, an act of cruelty so profound she'd wondered if Brandon had finally crossed into genuine sadism. Gold-embossed cardstock announcing the marriage of Brandon Mitchell and Victoria Chen, celebration to be held at the Riverside Estate, the most expensive venue in 3 counties. "Almost done," Brandon assured Victoria, then turned back to Rebecca with eyes gone cold again. "Application denied. You don't meet any of our lending criteria. You have no collateral, no stable income, and frankly, no prospects." "I have assets," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the tears burning behind her eyes. "I have—" "What assets?" Brandon actually laughed. "That studio apartment you're renting in the worst part of town? The car that doesn't run? Those 3 kids that drain every penny you manage to scrape together?" Victoria giggled, the sound like breaking glass. "She really thought you'd give her money after she let herself go like that? Brandon, you're too kind, even entertaining this." Rebecca stood, her legs somehow solid beneath her, despite feeling hollow everywhere else. She looked at Brandon, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. Not the boy who'd taken her to prom and promised her stars. Not the young man who'd proposed with his grandmother's ring and tears in his eyes. Not even the husband who'd grown distant and critical as her pregnancy advanced. This was someone new, someone who looked at the mother of his children and felt nothing but contempt. "I notice you're still wearing your ring," Victoria observed, nodding at Rebecca's left hand. Rebecca glanced down at the thin gold band she hadn't been able to bring herself to remove. Not because she still loved Brandon, that had died somewhere between "you're too fat" and the snowstorm, but because taking it off felt like admitting defeat. Like accepting that 7 years of marriage, 3 beautiful babies, and a lifetime of planned tomorrows had been reduced to nothing. "Pathetic," Victoria pronounced, and something in Rebecca finally, irrevocably broke. Not broke like shattered, broke like a fever breaking, broke like chains breaking, broke like free. "I'll see you both at the wedding," Rebecca said quietly, and walked away before either of them could respond. She made it to her car, Mrs. Chen's car, actually, borrowed for the day before the shaking started. She gripped the steering wheel and forced herself to breathe, to think, to plan. The loan denial was a setback, but not a disaster. She had other options. She always had other options. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd been avoiding for months. "Patricia," she said when her former mother-in-law answered, "I need you to set up a meeting. It's time." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Rebecca almost hung up. "Are you sure?" Patricia finally asked, her voice careful. "Once you do this, there's no going back. He'll know everything." "I'm sure. He's my son, Rebecca. I love him. But what he's done—" Patricia's voice cracked. "What he's doing. You have my full support. Whatever you need." "I need my lawyer," Rebecca said, "and I need access to the documents. All of them." "Consider it done." Rebecca sat in that parking lot for another 10 minutes, watching through the bank's glass windows as Brandon and Victoria laughed together, as he locked his office door, as they walked out arm in arm like conquerors, surveying conquered lands. They had no idea they were standing in her kingdom. 11 years ago, Rebecca Torres had been a different person. Fresh out of MIT with a dual degree in finance and computer science, she'd been recruited by 3 major firms before graduation. She'd chosen the smallest, most innovative one, a startup called Apex Financial Solutions, which showed promise but needed serious capital injection and better management structure. She'd invested her signing bonus and first year's salary into the company, taking a calculated risk that her professors called bold and her parents called insane. Within 3 years, she'd helped transform Apex Financial Solutions into Apex Heritage Bank, a regional powerhouse that expanded to national prominence by her 5th year with the company. She'd done it quietly, working behind the scenes, letting others take credit while she built something magnificent. By the time she was 27, Rebecca Torres owned controlling interest in Apex Heritage Bank through a web of LLCs and trust funds that would take a forensic accountant months to unravel. She'd met Brandon at a company mixer. He was a junior account manager then, ambitious but directionless, handsome but aware of it. She'd fallen hard and fast, mistaking his confidence for competence, his charm for depth. They'd married within a year, and Rebecca had made the conscious decision not to tell him about her ownership stake in the bank, not because she didn't trust him, at least not at first, but because she'd grown up watching wealthy friends attract partners who loved money more than people. She wanted to be sure Brandon loved her, not what she could provide. So she'd maintained the fiction of being a mid-level analyst, someone comfortable but not wealthy, someone building a future but not someone who already owned it. She'd deposited her substantial earnings into accounts he didn't know about, lived within the means of her supposed salary, and told herself that someday, when they were older and more secure, she'd reveal the truth and they'd laugh about it together. The pregnancy had accelerated everything. Triplets were unexpected, high risk, terrifying. Rebecca had been forced to take leave from her analyst position, the cover job she maintained, for appearances, and focus on keeping 3 tiny humans alive inside her rapidly changing body. Brandon had grown colder with each passing month of her pregnancy. Every pound she gained was commented on, every stretch mark noted with disgust, every limitation imposed by her doctor treated as a personal inconvenience to him. By month 7, when her obstetrician mandated bed rest, Brandon had stopped touching her entirely. "I married a beautiful woman," he'd said one night, staring at her swollen belly with undisguised revulsion. "Not this." She'd told herself it was stress, fear about becoming a father times 3, normal anxiety that would evaporate once the babies arrived and he held his children in his arms. She'd been catastrophically wrong. The babies, 2 girls and a boy, perfect and tiny and desperately premature at 33 weeks, had been in the NICU for 6 weeks. Brandon had visited twice, standing at the viewing window like he was examining exotic insects rather than his own children. When Rebecca had been cleared to bring them home, she'd arrived to find her belongings in garbage bags and Victoria Chen in her living room. The divorce had been rushed, brutal. Brandon had hired an aggressive attorney who painted Rebecca as an unstable, unemployed mother with no means to support 3 infants. Rebecca, still bleeding from childbirth and running on 90-minute sleep cycles between feedings, had been too exhausted to fight properly. She'd signed papers she barely read, agreed to terms that seemed designed to strip away everything, let Brandon keep the house and most of their joint assets, because fighting felt impossible when she could barely stand upright. But she'd kept her silence about the bank. She'd kept her secrets, and she'd waited. Lawrence Whitmore's law office occupied the top floor of the merchant building, all glass and steel and the kind of view that reminded you money could buy perspective. He'd been Rebecca's attorney since she first invested in Apex Financial Solutions, had helped structure her ownership to be as invisible as possible, and had watched her marriage deteriorate with the resigned disappointment of someone who'd tried to warn her. "You're sure about this?" he asked again, the same question Patricia had posed. "Once the paperwork is filed, once we make this public, I'm sure." Rebecca sat across from him, the babies in their stroller beside her, miraculously asleep after a morning of coordinated chaos. "I want him gone. Out of the bank, out of any position of authority, and I want him to know exactly why." Lawrence pulled out a folder thick with documents. Your ownership structure gives you 51% controlling interest in Apex Heritage Bank through the Torres Family Trust. The board of directors is required to defer to your decisions on all major personnel matters. Brandon Mitchell was hired 6 months ago as a senior loan officer. He what? Rebecca straightened. 6 months ago? That's right after your divorce was finalized, Lawrence confirmed. His resume was impressive, his references were impeccable, and on paper he was qualified for the position. The HR department had no reason to flag his application. Did they know he was my ex-husband? He listed your marriage as ended, but he didn't disclose the details. And honestly, Rebecca, even if they'd known, it wouldn't necessarily have been grounds for rejection. You'd kept your association with the bank completely secret. No one knew to look for a conflict of interest. Rebecca's mind raced. Brandon had gotten hired at her bank, right after leaving her. He'd been working under her authority, using her institution to rebuild his life with his mistress, all while believing she was some struggling single mother barely keeping her head above water. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. There's more, Lawrence said carefully. We've been monitoring your joint account as you requested, the one that was supposed to be frozen during the divorce proceedings. Rebecca's stomach tightened. What did he do? He drained it. $43,000 gone over the course of 4 months. Payments to Riverside Estate for a wedding venue. Payments to a jewelry store for rings. And a series of rent payments to a luxury apartment complex downtown. He stole our money to pay rent for Victoria. Rebecca's voice came out strangled. That account was supposed to be for the babies, for their future. Technically, it wasn't theft because his name was still on the account. But morally, Lawrence's expression darkened. Yes, he stole from his own children to finance his new life. Rebecca closed her eyes, breathed through the rage that threatened to consume her. When she opened them again, she was calm, focused, ready. I want him fired, she said. I want his termination to be public, embarrassing, and I want every loan he's denied in the past 6 months reviewed by someone else, starting with mine. Lawrence smiled, the expression of a man about to enjoy his work. I've already drafted the paperwork. All you need to do is sign. The invitation had arrived in a cream envelope with gold script, her name written in calligraphy that probably cost $50. Inside, the details of Brandon and Victoria's upcoming nuptials were laid out like a challenge. Formal attire required, ceremony at 2 o'clock, reception to follow with dinner and dancing. At the bottom, in what was clearly Victoria's handwriting, a personal note. So you can see what a real woman looks like on her wedding day. Rebecca had shown it to Mrs. Chen, who'd made a sound like a growling cat, and offered to accidentally set it on fire, but Rebecca had kept it pinned to her refrigerator like a promise. I'm going, she told Patricia over the phone 2 days after the meeting with Lawrence. Absolutely not. Patricia's voice was sharp. Rebecca, why would you torture yourself like that? Because I want him to see me. Rebecca shifted her phone to her other ear, holding a bottle for Emma, while Sophie and James took their afternoon nap. I want him to look at me and know that I survived him, that he didn't break me. You don't need to prove anything. I need to see his face, Rebecca interrupted. When everything comes crashing down, I need to watch it happen. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. You're not just planning to attend, are you? You have something else in mind. I'm having his employment terminated the morning of his wedding, Rebecca said calmly. Lawrence is filing the paperwork tomorrow, but we're timing the execution for maximum impact. Brandon will receive his termination notice at 10 a.m. on his wedding day, 4 hours before he's supposed to walk down the aisle. Sweet God! Patricia sounded horrified and impressed in equal measure. That's cruel, Rebecca suggested. Excessive? Everything he deserves? All of the above, Patricia paused. "I want to be there, at the wedding. If you're going to face him, you shouldn't do it alone." "You'd do that? Stand with me against your own son?" "He stopped being the son I raised when he put you and those babies out in the snow," Patricia said firmly. "I'll stand with you, Rebecca, however you need me." The morning of the wedding arrived. With weak December sunlight and temperatures cold enough that Rebecca's breath fogged when she stepped outside to load the babies into Mrs. Chen's car. Patricia was meeting her at the venue, and the babies would stay with a professional sitter Patricia had hired, someone vetted and trusted, because Rebecca refused to miss this moment. Her phone rang at 9:47 a.m. "It's done," Lawrence said without preamble. Termination notice delivered to Brandon Mitchell via certified mail and email. Security has been notified to escort him from the building if he attempts to enter. His access cards are deactivated, his computer accounts frozen, and HR is preparing a full review of his loan decisions. "Did they find anything?" Rebecca asked, her heart pounding. 37 questionable denials in the past 6 months. Most were people who met all standard criteria, but were rejected for subjective reasons. Women, mostly, single mothers, specifically. "It appears your ex-husband has been using his position to exercise his personal biases." Rebecca felt sick. How many women like her, struggling, desperate, trying their best, had sat across from Brandon and been told they weren't good enough? How many had walked away believing they truly were failures? Can they be reversed? Already in progress. The bank is reaching out to every denied applicant for reconsideration. It'll take months to sort through, but yes, they'll be reviewed properly. Good. Rebecca ended the call and checked her appearance in the mirror one final time. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a dress that was elegant without being flashy, professionally tailored to flatter her figure, the figure Brandon had called disgusting. Her hair was styled, her makeup perfect, and she looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd been knocked down and decided to get back up swinging. The Riverside estate was everything the invitation had promised, sprawling, luxurious, decorated within an inch of its life. Ice sculptures flanked the entrance, white roses covered every available surface, and a string quartet played soft classical music that probably cost more per hour than Rebecca used to spend on groceries per month. Patricia met her at the door, stunning in navy blue, her face set in lines of grim determination. "He knows," she said quietly. "Brandon knows. He's been calling me non-stop since 10 this morning." "What's he saying?" "Everything from begging me to fix it to accusing you of vindictive manipulation." Patricia's mouth twisted. He hasn't once mentioned his children, you'll notice. Not once asked how they're doing or expressed any regret for stealing their money. They entered together, heads high, and Rebecca felt every eye in the room turn to assess her. Whispers started immediately. She could read the gossip on their faces, the speculation, the judgment. There's the ex-wife. There's the woman Brandon left. Look at her coming here, how pathetic. Let them whisper. They'd be singing a different tune soon enough. The ceremony was held in a garden pavilion despite the December cold, because apparently Victoria wanted the aesthetic more than she wanted anyone to be comfortable. Guests shivered in their formal wear, breath fogging, while Brandon stood at the altar looking like he might vomit. He saw Rebecca the moment she sat down, and the color drained from his face so quickly she worried he might actually pass out. Good. Let him panic. Let him wonder what she was planning, what she knew, what consequences were racing toward him like a freight train. Victoria appeared in a dress that was objectively stunning and subjectively trying way too hard. All crystals and tulle and a train so long 3 children were employed to carry it. She looked like a princess from a nightmare, beautiful and cold and sharp-edged. The ceremony began. Rebecca sat through it with Patricia's hand gripping hers, both of them silent witnesses to promises that rang hollow. Love, honor, cherish, the same words Brandon had said to her 11 years ago, the same promises he'd broken without a second thought. "If anyone objects to this union," the officiant intoned, "speak now or forever. Hold your peace." Rebecca stayed silent. This wasn't the moment, not yet. They were pronounced husband and wife. They kissed, a performance more than a connection. Guests applauded. The string quartet swelled into something triumphant. Brandon and Victoria walked back down the aisle together, and Victoria's eyes found Rebecca in the crowd, her smile victorious. The reception was held in the estate's ballroom, a space so opulent it felt like eating inside a jewelry box. Rebecca and Patricia found their assigned table, cleverly placed near the kitchen as far from the head table as possible, a deliberate insult, and waited. Dinner was served. Toasts were made. Brandon's best man told a story about their college days that made him sound wild and fun, instead of the cruel man-child Rebecca knew him to be. Victoria's maid of honor gushed about true love conquering all obstacles, and Rebecca had to bite her tongue to keep from laughing. Then came the moment she'd been waiting for. Brandon stood to make a toast, champagne glass in hand, his smile confident. "I want to thank everyone for being here today, to celebrate what I can only describe as the luckiest day of my life." His eyes scanned the crowd and landed on Rebecca, his smile turning into a smirk. "I've learned that life is too short to settle for less than you deserve. Sometimes you have to make hard choices, walk away from situations that aren't serving you, and find the person who truly complements who you are." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Victoria glowed like someone had plugged her into an electrical socket. "Some people might judge those choices," Brandon continued, still looking at Rebecca. "Some people might say you should stay in situations that make you miserable out of obligation or outdated notions of loyalty, but I say, Mr. Mitchell." A new voice cut through the ballroom like a blade through silk. Lawrence Whitmore stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards and a woman Rebecca recognized as Apex Heritage Bank's head of HR. All 4 of them looked like they meant business. Brandon's smile faltered. "This is a private event. Mr. Mitchell, we need to speak with you immediately." Lawrence stepped forward, and every eye in the room swiveled between him and Brandon like watching a tennis match. "It concerns your employment termination this morning and several related legal matters." The silence was absolute. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. "I don't know what you're talking about." Brandon set down his champagne glass carefully, like it might explode. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake." Lawrence's voice carried to every corner of the ballroom. "You were terminated from your position at Apex Heritage Bank at 10 a.m. today for cause including discriminatory lending practices and misappropriation of company resources. Additionally, there's the matter of $43,000 illegally withdrawn from a protected account during divorce proceedings." Victoria grabbed Brandon's arm. "What is he talking about, Brandon?" "There's also," Lawrence continued, clearly enjoying himself now, "the matter of your complete ignorance regarding your ex-wife's actual position and authority." "My ex-wife is unemployed," Brandon said, voice rising. "She has nothing to do with any of this. She's just a bitter woman who can't accept that I've moved on." "Your ex-wife," Lawrence interrupted, "is Rebecca Torres. Does that name mean anything to you?" Brandon stared at him blankly. "That's her maiden name, so what?" "Rebecca Torres is the majority shareholder and controlling owner of Apex Heritage Bank." Lawrence let that land like a bomb. "She has been since before you met her. She owns the institution you worked for, the building you worked in, and she had ultimate authority over your employment there." The color drained from Brandon's face so completely, he looked like a ghost. Victoria made a sound between a gasp and a shriek. The ballroom erupted in whispers that built to a roar. "That's impossible," Brandon said, but his voice had gone weak. She was a financial analyst." Lawrence smiled. "Yes, that was her cover position. Her actual role was owner, and until she took maternity leave, active manager of the company's investment strategies. Quite successful ones, as it turns out. The bank's assets have tripled under her guidance." Rebecca stood. Every eye turned to her. She walked toward the head table with Patricia beside her, her chin high, her steps steady. "Hi, Brandon," she said quietly. "Surprise. You—" Brandon looked like he might pass out. "You can't. This is—" "I can, and I did." Rebecca's voice was gentle, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. "You denied my loan application 2 weeks ago, mocked my poverty, called me a joke. The whole time you were sitting in an office I own, working for a company I built, drawing a salary that ultimately came from my decisions." "You lying bitch!" Victoria shrieked, lunging forward before Patricia stepped between them. "You tricked him. You manipulated him. "I loved him," Rebecca said simply, and something in her tone made Victoria stop mid-rant. "I loved him enough to want him to love me, not for my money. I wanted to be sure he chose me, not what I could provide. Turns out I was right to be cautious, wasn't I? Because the second I couldn't provide the perfect image he wanted, he threw me away." "This is insane," Brandon said, but he was looking around now, seeing the faces of his guests, reading the judgment in their eyes. "You're crazy, Rebecca. You're making this up because you're jealous." "Mr. Mitchell," the HR director stepped forward, her voice crisp and professional. "I have documentation of every claim Mr. Whitmore has made, including evidence that you denied 37 loans to qualified applicants based on gender discrimination and personal bias. Additionally, bank records show you used your position to access account information about your ex-wife without authorization, which violates multiple banking regulations and privacy laws." "I was checking on my kids." "You have no custody of those children," Lawrence interrupted. "You signed away your parental rights as part of the divorce settlement in exchange for reduced child support obligations. You have no legal right to access information about Ms. Torres or her finances." Rebecca watched Brandon crumble in real time. His face went from denial to anger to desperate panic, cycling through emotions so quickly she might have felt sorry for him if he hadn't spat her out into a snowstorm with 3 newborns. "The wedding," Victoria whispered, looking around at their guests, at the elaborate decorations, at the life they'd built on lies and stolen money. "Brandon, what do we do?" "What you do," Patricia said coldly, speaking for the first time, "is face the consequences of your choices. My son threw away the best thing that ever happened to him because he valued appearances over substance. He abandoned his children, he stole from them, and now he gets to live with what comes next." "Mom," Brandon started, but Patricia held up a hand. "Don't. I raised you better than this, Brandon. I taught you to value character, integrity, kindness. You chose to ignore all of it for what? A woman who judges people based on their dress size? A life built on someone else's suffering?" Patricia's voice broke. "You're not the son I thought I raised, and until you become someone who deserves those beautiful children, don't call me." Rebecca touched Patricia's arm gently. "We should go." "Wait." Brandon's voice stopped her at the edge of the dance floor. She turned back to find him standing alone. Victoria had retreated to a corner, and his friends had all suddenly found other places to be. "Rebecca, please, we can fix this. I'll get another job. I'll pay back the money. We can work something out." "No," Rebecca said simply. "We can't. You made your choices, Brandon. You decided I wasn't worth basic human decency. You decided your children weren't worth your love. You decided a woman's value could be measured by her dress size and her bank balance. Those weren't mistakes, they were choices. And now you get to live with them." She turned to Lawrence. "I want a full accounting of everywhere he spent money, from that joint account. Every penny he stole from his children's future, I want documented and pursued legally." "Already underway," Lawrence assured her. "And the loans he denied?" "Being reviewed and processed. Several have already been approved, including yours." Rebecca smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in months. "Good, then we're done here." She walked out of that ballroom with her head high, Patricia beside her, leaving behind the wreckage of Brandon's carefully constructed new life. Behind her, she could hear Victoria shrieking about wasted money, about how this was supposed to be perfect, about how Brandon had promised her everything. Outside, the December air was cold enough to sting, and Rebecca breathed it in like freedom. "What happens now?" Patricia asked quietly. "Now?" Rebecca pulled out her phone to check on the babies. "Now I take my loan, start my business, and raise 3 amazing kids who will never, ever doubt their worth. Now I build the life Brandon told me I was too pathetic to have. And now I stop letting his opinion of me matter more than my own." Patricia hugged her, fierce and tight and full of promise. "Those babies are lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have them," Rebecca corrected. "They saved me in a way, gave me a reason to get up when everything hurt, reminded me that I was strong enough to survive anything." Her phone buzzed with a photo from the sitter, all 3 babies asleep in a pile, tiny hands curled around each other, perfect and peaceful and loved beyond measure. "Let's go home," Rebecca said, and they did. 6 months later, Rebecca Torres Consulting had 15 clients and a waiting list. Her loan, approved for $10,000 instead of $5, based on a review of her actual qualifications, had been seed money for something extraordinary. Turns out there was a massive market for financial consulting from someone who understood both the corporate world and the real struggles of everyday people. Brandon had filed for bankruptcy after the bank sued him for the stolen money, and his discriminatory practices cost him any chance at employment in the financial sector. Victoria had left him 3 weeks after the wedding, taking the gifts and leaving the bills. He'd moved back in with his father. Patricia had finally changed her locks and was working at a call center trying to rebuild from rubble. Rebecca tried not to follow his fall too closely. It wasn't healthy, Patricia told her, to invest energy in his destruction. Better to focus on her own reconstruction. The triplets were thriving, walking now, babbling in their own secret language, filling her small apartment with chaos and joy in equal measure. Sophie had her father's green eyes, but her mother's stubborn determination. Emma was quiet and thoughtful, always watching, always learning. James was pure joy, laughing at everything, finding wonder in the smallest moments. Rebecca had bought a house. Nothing extravagant, she still kept her wealth quiet, still valued privacy over ostentation, but enough space for her growing family. 4 bedrooms, a yard, a neighborhood with good schools, and kind neighbors who didn't judge a single mother with 3 toddlers. Patricia visited every Sunday, teaching her grandchildren Spanish and spoiling them with the kind of love that reminded Rebecca family wasn't always about blood, it was about who showed up. And Rebecca, she finally took off her wedding ring, took it off and put it in a box in the back of her closet, not thrown away but not worn either, a reminder of who she'd been, who she'd loved, and who she'd become when that love proved hollow. She was 34 years old, a single mother of 3, owner of a multi-billion-dollar bank, and founder of a consulting business that was changing lives. She was scarred and stronger, broken and rebuilt, and finally free. Brandon had tried to crush her. Instead, he'd forged her into something unbreakable. And that, Rebecca thought as she watched her children play in their new backyard, was the best revenge of all.